Despite unremitting anti-Semitism and persecution, many Jewish communities managed against great odds to remain in the Promised Land during the long interval between the Roman dispersion and the events leading to the re-establishment of the Jewish state in 1948. What if the dispute has never been about Palestinian statehood, but really about the destruction of the Jews and the only Jewish state on earth? In 1917, the Balfour Declaration, confirmed later by international law through the League of Nations, declared the British mandate of Palestine to be a national home for the Jewish people, recognizing 4,000 years of Jewish connection to the land and the injustice of the destruction of ancient Israel by the Romans and the forced removal of the Jewish people. In 1922, the British, in contravention of their mandate, took 76% of the land designated for a Jewish state in Palestine and allocated it instead to the Arabs, creating east of the Jordan River a new country, then called Transjordan and later to be known as Jordan, which to this day has a Palestinian majority. In 1947, the United Nations voted to establish two states, one Arab and one Jewish, west of the Jordan River on the remaining 24% of the original portion of the land allocated for a Jewish state by the international community. In spite of this enormous reduction of their original portion, the Jews accepted the offer, but even this was rejected by the Arabs. The Arabs wanted all. This was the beginning of a long history of Arab rejectionism. Ladies and gentlemen, 60 years ago, there was on the table a two-state solution. This is not a new idea, as we are deceived into believing by the extremely well-oiled and financed Arab propaganda machine and the imbecile, ignorant, or downright stupid and criminally negligent Western news media. So what are the facts? In 1948, the newly reborn State of Israel was invaded by 5 Arab armies from Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and the Arab Legion of Jordan, all of whom made it crystal clear that they intended to destroy the tiny Jewish state at its birth and to massacre its citizens, hundreds of thousands of whom were Holocaust survivors. The Jews, who were literally fighting for their very survival, were able to defeat all the Arab armies, who were forced to sue for a ceasefire. The cessation of hostilities was supposed to be a prelude for further negotiations between Israel and her Arab neighbors for a permanent peace. The Arab demands were, as was and continues to be the norm, one-sided and tantamount to asking Israel to self-destruct. I have to point out a few simple but important details that invariably and very conveniently escape the intellect and morality of the Arabs. Before the war against the Jews and the establishment of the State of Israel, there were no Arab refugees. According to the records kept by the British about the demography of mandated Palestine, more and more Arabs from the surrounding countries settled in Palestine because of the prosperity that the Jews were bringing to the land. The Palestinian Arab refugees were the product of a war of aggression by the surrounding Arab states as well as by the Palestinian Arabs against the UN resolution creating a two-state solution to the Arab-Jewish dispute. While the Palestinian Arab refugees of allegedly 700,000 were the end result of Arab aggression, the Jewish refugees from Arab and Mohammedan lands, numbering about 900,000, were the product of anti-Semitic, Nazi-style rules and regulations perpetrated against these ancient communities that were occupied by the conquering Arab armies almost 1,300 to 1,400 years earlier. During the same period of 1947-48, the British also left India and the division of the subcontinent into a secular Indian state and a Muslim Pakistan. In the ensuing civil disorders, hundreds of thousands were massacred and about 20 million became refugees. There are no UN resolutions demanding any compensation or the right of return to any of the Jewish or Hindi refugees, but only for the Palestinians. There are no UN financial arrangements to help or compensate these particular refugees except only for the Palestinians. For the last 60 years, we only hear about the plight of the Palestinian refugees, but never about the Jewish or Hindi ones. While the Jewish and Hindi refugees were absorbed by their respective nationals, the Palestinians were and are still used as tools for keeping the Arab leaders in power under the pretext that they are fighting for their cause. While the Palestinian refugees have been helped financially by the Western governments and by some of the Arab states with billions of aid dollars, not a penny was raised for the Jewish or Hindi refugees. The Palestinian refugees escaped to the neighboring Arab states only a few miles in any direction, speaking the same language, having the same beliefs and traditions, while the Jewish refugees had to travel in many cases hundreds and thousands of miles, speaking 70 languages and dialects with incredibly different traditions. While the Jewish refugees suffered as much, if not more, than the Palestinian ones for the first decades of their exile in the refugee tents, as we speak today, they became assimilated and productive members of their country. Unfortunately, as we see on television and read in the news media, the Palestinian refugees did not assimilate and or integrate among their brothers and sister Arabs, but remained a sore on the body of the host countries. While the Jews of Israel from 70 different countries around the world created a thriving and vibrant, free, all-inclusive democracy, we see the Palestinian people at war with each other as well as with their host Arab people. If it were true that the Jews were using ethnic cleansing against the Palestinian Arabs, then how can any human being explain the fact that there are 1.5 million Palestinian Arabs as citizens of the State of Israel of 5 million Jews, while one cannot count more than 10,000 Jews among 330 million Arabs in 22 states? So who actually achieved the ethnic cleansing? As we have amply demonstrated about Muhammad, that he always accused his victims of the very acts that he perpetrated against them. This is the methodology of projective identification. Muhammad's followers have been inordinately successful in their propaganda by using this methodology so effectively that most of the Western news media fall head over heels for their lies and mendacities. Once more, I would like to point out to you, our listeners, that a two-state solution has been on the table for the last 60 years, but was always rejected by the very Arabs, who are deceptively claiming that this is all they are aiming for. 60 years have been wasted to be told today that all that the Arabs want is a two-state solution. The level of hypocrisy and mendacity displayed by the Arabs and the media is so obscene it beggars belief and morality. Israel survived the war of Arab aggression against its establishment, and from 1948 to 1967, the West Bank and the Gaza Strip were in Arab hands, and there was no Jewish occupation of these territories then. For 19 years, there were no Israelis in Gaza or the West Bank. For 19 years, there were no settlements or occupation by Jews in Gaza or the West Bank. For 19 years, neither the UN nor any government in the world objected to the occupation by Transjordan and Egypt of what were actually lands designated for the two states, Palestinian part, by the United Nations. For 19 years, not a single European or Arab government or any of their news media ever cried out loud and with a sustained voice about these blatant occupations. For 19 years, no one in Western academia, Western labor unions, or any Western teachers' unions were any attempts made to boycott the academics and unions of Egypt or Jordan. For 19 years, the whole world and the United Nations were deafeningly silent about the issues of Palestinian occupied lands or even the expression Palestinian people. If the cause for the current Arab-Israeli conflict is the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza after the 1967 Six Days War, then why did the conflict and aggression against Israel rage throughout these earlier 19 years, from 1948 to 1967, unabated, with continued Arab refusal to recognize Israel and to make peace with its Jewish neighbor?